Hello everyone, so we're from group 6 and today we're going to present chapter 9 and chapter 10 about fundamentals of group behavior and understanding teamwork.
So I'm going to be presenting the first learning objective, which is defining and classifying groups. So what is group and why do people form groups? So group is two or more individuals interacting and interdependent who have come together to achieve particular objectives. And we have social identities that help us understand who we are and where we fit in with other people, and our tendency to take personal pride or events for the accomplishment of a group is the territory of social identity theory. And the social identities have a negative side too, which is in group favoritism. So we see members of our in group as better than other people, and people that are not in our group as all the same. Next, we have the characteristic that makes social identity important to a person. So first is the similarity, which is the same value that drives to a higher level of group identification. And the second one is distinctiveness, which people notice identities that show how they are different from other people. And the third one is status, which people use identities to define themselves and increase a self-esteem. The last one is uncertainty reduction, so people understand who they are and how they fit into the world. So next we have the stages of group development. There are 5-stage model. So the first stage is forming, which is characterized by uncertainty of the group's purposes, structure, and leadership. And the second stage is storming, which is characterized by intra-group conflicts. So intra-group conflict basically is the members accept the group existence, but they resist its constraint that imposes on individuality. And the third stage is norming, which is characterized by close relationship and cohesiveness. The fourth stage is performing, which is the group is fully functional. And the last stage is adjourning, which is wrapping up activities and preparing to disband. So there are groups with deadlines that don't follow the 5-stage model, and these are the alternative model. So their first meeting sets the group direction, and the first phase of group activity is one of inertia, and a transition takes place at the end of this phase, and a transition initiates major changes, and a second phase of inertia follows the transition, and the group's last meeting is characterized by markedly accelerated activity.
So the next one is group properties that divided into 6. The first group property is role. Role is a set of expected behavior patterns attributed to someone occupying a given position in a social unit, and one of the tasks in understanding behavior is grasping the role a person is currently playing. And role perception is an individual's view of how he or she is supposed to act in a given situation, like when we form an impression of the work of doctors from watching Grey's Anatomy. Then there is role expectation, which is the way others believe you should act in a given context, like the role of a federal judge is viewed as having propriety and dignity while in the workplace. We see it through the psychological contract, which is an unwritten agreement that sets out what management expects from an employee and vice versa. Like, management is expected to treat employees justly, provide acceptable working conditions, and give feedback on how well an employee is doing. And employees are expected to respond by demonstrating a good attitude and showing loyalty. Then there is role conflict, which is the result when compliance with one role requirement may make it difficult to comply with another. And there is an experiment by Stanford University psychologist called Zimbardo's prison experiment by assigned the role of guard and prisoner and established some basic rules. And turns out the participant had learned stereotype conception of guard and prisoners from the mass media and their own experience at home, school, and other situations. And it allowed them easily and rapidly to assume roles very differently from their own personalities with no prior personality pathology or training, and execute extreme forms of behavior consistent with those rules. The second one is norm. Norm is an acceptable standards of behavior shared by their members that express what they ought and ought not to do under certain circumstances. And there are four kinds of norms. The first one is performance norms, which providing explicit cues about how hard members should work and what the level of output should be and how to get the job done. Then the second one is appearance norm, which like dress code, unspoken rules about when to look busy. Then there is social arrangement norm, which with whom to eat lunch, whether to form friendships on and off the job. And the last one is resource allocation norms, is an assignment of difficult jobs and distribution of resources like pay or equipment. And there is a research called the Hawthorne Studies that research about the relationship between the physical environment and productivity, and turns out individual behavior is influenced by group norms. And they observed that a group of workers determine the level of fair output and establish norms for individual work rates that conform to the output. Then there is divine workplace behavior, also called as antisocial behavior or workplace incivility, is voluntary behavior that violates significant organizational norms and in doing so threaten the well-being of the organizational or its members. For example, the first category, which is production, are living early and wasting resources. Then poverty examples are sabotage and stealing from the organization. After that, there is political, which showing favoritism and blaming co-workers. And the last one, personal aggression examples are sexual harassment and verbal abuse. The next one, there is status. Status is a socially defined position or rank is given to groups or group members by others. For high status individuals are often given more freedom to deviate from norms than are other groups members. And they tend to be more assertive, and it's important for group members to believe the status hierarchy is equitable, since large differences in status within groups are also associated with poor individual performance, lower health, and higher intention to leave the group. Then what determines the status? The first one is the power a person wields over others, then a person's ability to contribute to group goals, and the last one is an individual's personal characteristics. Then the fourth one of group properties is size. The size of a group can affect the group's overall behavior. Smaller groups are faster at completing tasks and individuals perform better in smaller groups. But in problem solving, large groups consistently get better marks since they are good for gaining diverse input. And one of the most important findings about the size of a group concerns social loafing. So how to prevent social loafing? The first one, you should set group goals. Then increase intergroup competition, also engage in peer evaluation. Then select members who have high motivation to work in groups, and if possible, base group reward in part on each member's unique contribution. So the fifth one is cohesiveness, is the degree to which members are attracted to each other and motivated to stay in the group, and it affects group productivity that depends on the group's performance-related norms. So as we can see here, when a group has high cohesiveness and performance norms, it will have high productivity, while when the group has high cohesiveness but low performance norms, it will have low productivity. And when the group has low cohesiveness but high perform norms, it will have moderate productivity. And the last one, when a group has low cohesiveness and performance norms, it will have moderate to low productivity. And the last one is diversity, which is the degree to which members of the group are similar to or different from one another. And it appears to increase group conflict, and higher levels of tenure diversity were not related to lower performance for groups when there were effective team-oriented human resources practice. However, culturally and demographically diverse groups may perform better over time.
The next we are going to talk about is the group decision making. Decision-making groups may be widely used in organizations, but are group decisions preferable to those made by an individual alone? The answer depends on a number of factors, which are their strengths and weaknesses. Let's see the strengths of group decision-making first. Groups generate more complete information and knowledge. By aggregating the resources of several individuals, groups bring more input as well as heterogeneity into the decision process. They offer increased diversity of views. This opens up the opportunity to consider more approaches and alternatives. Finally, groups lead to increased acceptance of a solution. Group members who participated in making a decision are more likely to enthusiastically support and encourage others to accept it. On the other hand, group decision-making also have weaknesses, which is the group decisions are time-consuming because groups typically take more time to reach a solution. There are conformity pressures. The desire by group members to be accepted and considered an asset to the group can squash any overt disagreement. Group discussion can be dominated by only one or a few members of the group. If they are low and medium ability members, the group's overall effectiveness will suffer. And finally, group decisions suffer from ambiguous responsibility. In an individual decision, it's clear who is accountable for the final outcome, but in a group decision, the responsibility of any single member is diluted. The next one, we are going to talk about group decision making's effectiveness and efficiency. First, from the effectiveness, whether groups are more effective than individuals depend on how many people define effectiveness. Group decisions are generally more accurate than the decisions on the average individual in a group, but less accurate than the judgments of the most accurate. In terms of speed, individuals are superior, but in terms of creativity, groups tend to be more effective, and if effectiveness means the degree of acceptance the final solution achieves, the nod again goes to the group. But we cannot consider effectiveness without also assessing efficiency. With few exceptions, group decision-making consumes more work hours than an individual tackling the same problem alone. The exceptions tend to be the instances in which, to achieve comparable quantities of diverse input, the single decision maker must spend a great deal of time reviewing files and talking to the other people. In deciding whether to use groups, then managers must assess whether increases in effectiveness are more high than enough to offset the reductions in efficiency. In a group, there might also be groupthink and group shift. The first, called groupthink, relates to norms, as it describes the situations in which group pressures for conformity deter the group from critically appraising unusual, minority, or unpopular views. Groupthink is a disease that attacks many groups and can dramatically hinder their performance. The second phenomenon is group shift, which describes the way group members tend to exaggerate the initial positions they hold when discussing a given set of alternatives and arriving at a solution. In some situations, caution dominates and there is a conservative shift, while in other situations, groups tend toward a risky shift. Let's look at each phenomenon in detail. Have you ever felt like speaking up in a meeting, a classroom, or an informal group, but decided against it? One reason may have been shyness, or you may have been a victim of groupthink, which occurs when the norm for consensus overrides the realistic appraisal of alternative courses and the full expression of deviant, minority, or unpopular views. The individual's mental efficiency, reality testing, and moral judgment deteriorate as a result of group pressures. These are the few common symptoms of groupthink. The first one is group members rationalize any resistance to the assumptions they have made. No matter how strongly the evidence may contradict their basic assumptions, they behave so as to reinforce the theme. Second one is members apply direct pressures on those who momentarily express doubts about any of the group's shared views, or who question the validity of arguments supporting the alternative favored by the majority. The third one is members who have doubts or differing points of view seek to avoid deviating from what appears to be group consensus by keeping silent about misgivings and even minimizing to themselves the importance of their doubts. And the last symptom is there is an illusion of anonymity. If someone doesn't speak, it's assumed he or she is in full accord. Abstention then becomes a yes vote. The next one, we are going to talk about group polarization. We can view group polarization as a special case of groupthink, where the group's decision reflects the dominant decision-making norm that develops during discussion. Whether the shift in a group's decision is towards greater caution or more risk depends on the dominant pre-discussion norm. The shift toward polarization has generated several explanations. It has been argued, for instance, that discussion makes the members more comfortable with each other and thus more willing to express extreme versions of their original positions. Another argument is that the group diffuses responsibility. Group decisions free any single member from accountability for the group's final choice, so a more extreme position can be taken. It's also likely that people take on extreme positions because they want to demonstrate how different they are from the outgroup. People on the fringes of political or social movements take on ever more extreme positions just to prove that they are really committed to the cause, whereas those who are more cautious tend to take exceptionally moderate positions to demonstrate how reasonable they are. So, how should you use the findings of group shifts? Recognize that group decisions exaggerate the initial position of the individual members, that the shift has been shown more often to be toward greater risk, and that is which way a group will shift is a function of the members' pre-discussion inclinations. We now turn to techniques by which groups make decisions. These reduce some of the dysfunctional aspects of the group decision making.
Then there's group decision-making techniques. The first one is interacting group. It's the most common form of group decision-making. So the interacting group happen when members meet face-to-face and rely on both verbal and nonverbal interaction to communicate, and it pressures individual members toward conformity of opinion. The second one is brainstorming. They can overcome the pressures for conformity that dampen creativity by encouraging any and all alternatives while withholding criticism of those alternatives. Then there's the nominal group technique that restricts discussion or interpersonal communication during the decision-making process, that the group members are all physically present to pool their judgment in systematic but independent fashion. And the last one is electronic meeting, which the most recent approach to group decision-making blends the nominal group technique with sophisticated computer technology. So the members interact on computers, allowing for anonymity of comments and aggregation of votes. So here it is, we evaluate the group effectiveness by comparing the effectiveness of interacting, brainstorming, nominal, and electronic meeting groups. So for the first criteria, number and quality of ideas, for interacting, effectiveness is low, brainstorming moderate, nominal high, and electronic high. For the second criteria, social pressure, the effectiveness of interacting group is high, brainstorming low, nominal moderate, and electronic low. For the third criteria, which is money cost, all of the type of group effectiveness is low except for the electronic group is high. Then there is speed. All of the type of group effectiveness is moderate. Then task orientation, Effectiveness overall is high, except for interacting groups. And for potential for interpersonal conflict, the effectiveness for interacting group is high, brainstorming low, nominal moderate, and electronic low. And for the commitment solution, interacting effectiveness is high, brainstorming not applicable, nominal moderate, and also electronic moderate. And for the last criteria, which is development of group cohesiveness, for interacting and brainstorming group is high, while for the nominal, moderate, and electronic group is low.
And moving on to the next learning objective, I will explain about the difference between group and team. Okay, so for the difference between group and team, as you guys can see on the exhibit 10.1 shows that the work group interacts primarily to share information and make decisions to help members perform within his or her area of responsibility. In contrast, a work team generates positive synergy through coordinated effort. Individual efforts result in a level of performance that is greater than the sum of those individual inputs. And now I will explain about the types of work teams. Exhibit 10.2 identifies 4 common types of teams, but in addition, we will also describe multi-team system, and we will describe the 5 types of teams on the next slide. Okay, so the first are problem-solving teams, and in the past, teams were typically composed of 5 until 12 hourly employees from the same department who met for a few hours each week to discuss ways of improving quality, efficiency, and the work environment. These problem-solving teams rarely had the authority to implement their suggested actions. While self-managed teams are groups of employees who perform highly related or interdependent jobs and take on many of the responsibilities of supervisors. So the third types of teams are cross-functional teams that made up of employees from about the same hierarchical level but different work areas who come together to accomplish a task. While virtual teams use computer technology to tie together physically disparate members in order to achieve a common goal. So I already described the 4 types of teams, but actually there is one more type of teams. Maybe it's not a type, it's more like systems. Because as tasks become more complex, teams often grow in size. And the increase in team size are accompanied by higher coordination demands, creating a tipping point at which the addition of another member does more harm than good. So to solve this problem, organization use multi-team system, which is a collection of 2 or more interdependent teams that share a subordinate goal. Or in other words, multi-team systems are a team of teams. And in general, a multi-team system is the best choice, either when a team has become too large to be effective or when teams with distinct functions need to be highly coordinated.
Creating effective teams when individuals can do a better job is like perfectly solving around problems. This is the team effectiveness model, where I will discuss deeper in the next slide. So there are 3 main components to make a team effective. The first one is context. It explains about what factors determine whether the teams are successful or not. So the first one is adequate resources. It is the tools to complete the job. A scarcity of resources directly reduces the ability of team to perform job effectively and achieve their goals. So we need adequate resources to complete our job and to achieve our goals smoothly. The second one is effective leadership and structure. It is agreeing to specify of the work and how the team fits together to integrate their individual skills. Even self-managed teams must need a leader. And leadership especially important in multi-team systems. And the third one is climate of trust. Every member must trust each other and also the leader. And the last one is performance and reward system that reflect the team's contribution. It cannot be just based on individual effort. It must be on team effort. So the output must be represent the team. So the second component to make an effective team is the team composition. The first one is ability of the members. Sometimes the performance of the team is based on the ability of its members, like skills. So we need like technical expertise, problem solving, decision making, and good interpersonal skills to accomplish the task. And the second one is personality of the members, like consciousness, openness to experience, and agreeableness, all related to the team performance. It is so important that the team can bond and form a trust. And the third one is allocating roles and diversity. Many necessary roles must be filled. Although often diversity can lead to lower performance, so it is necessary that we can manage diversity of the members wisely. And the fourth one is size of the team. It is the smaller the better. For example, like 5 to 9 is optimal to make the team effective and accomplish their goals. And the last one is member preference for teamwork. We have to ask like, do the members want to be in teams or not? So the last component to make an effective team is a process. The first one is commitment to a common purpose. We have to create a common purpose that provides direction. And we also have reflexivity. It is a willingness to adjust the plan if it is necessary. And the second one is establishment of specific team goals. The goals must be specific, measurable, realistic, and also challenging. And the third one is team efficacy. It is a team belief in its ability to succeed. And the fourth one is mental models. It is to have an accurate and common mental map of how the work gets done. And number 5 is a managed level of conflict. It is a task conflicts are helpful and interpersonal conflicts are not helpful. And the last one is minimize social loathing. Team holds itself as accountable both individually and as a team.
And then we move on into how we can turn individuals into team players. We have made a strong case for the value and growing popularity of teams, but many people are not inherently team players, and many organizations have historically nurtured individual accomplishments. Finally, teams fit well in countries that score high on collectivism. But what if an organization wants to introduce teams into a work population of individuals born and raised in an individualistic society? A veteran employee of a large company who had done well working in an individualistic company in an individualist country described the experience of joining a team as, "I'm learning my lesson. I just had my first negative performance appraisal in 20 years." So, what can organizations do to enhance team effectiveness to turn individual contributors into team members? Here are options for managers trying to turn individuals into team players. The first step is selecting, which is hiring team players. Some people already possess the interpersonal skills to be effective team players. When hiring team members, be sure candidates can fulfill their team roles as well as technical requirements. When faced with job candidates who lack team skills, managers have 3 options. First, don't hire them. And if you have to hire them, assign them to tasks or positions that don't require teamwork. If that is not feasible, the candidates can undergo training to make them into team players. In established organizations that decide to redesign jobs around teams, some employees will resist being team players and may be untrainable. Unfortunately, they typically become casualties of the team approach. The second step is training, which is creating team players. Training specialists conduct exercises that allow people or employees to experience the satisfaction teamwork can provide. Workshops help employees improve their problem solving, communication, negotiation, conflict management, and coaching skills. For example, is L'Oreal found that successful sales teams required much more than being staffed with high-ability salespeople, which is management had to focus much of its efforts on team building. What we didn't account was that many members of our top team in sales had been promoted because they had excellent technical and executional skills, said L'Oreal's Senior VP of Sales, David Waldock. As a result of the focus on team training, Waldock says, "We are no longer a team just on paper, working independently. We have a real group dynamic now, and it's a good one." So developing an effective team doesn't happen overnight as it takes time. As we have seen from the L'Oreal example before, we need to know that developing an effective team doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and the patience for the managers to make a good teamwork. The third step is rewarding, which is providing incentives to be a good team player. An organization's reward system must be a reward to encourage cooperative efforts rather than competitive ones. For example, is Whole Foods, as they direct most of its performance-based rewards towards team performance, and as a result, teams select new members carefully so they will contribute to team effectiveness and thus team bonuses. We need to understand that promotions, pay raises, and other forms of recognition should be given to individuals who work effectively as team members by training new colleagues, sharing information, helping resolve team conflicts, and mastering needed new skills. But this doesn't mean that individual contributions should be ignored. Rather, they should be balanced with selfless contributions to the team. And finally, don't forget that we have the intrinsic rewards, such as camaraderie, that employees can receive from teamwork. It's exciting and satisfying to be part of a successful team. The opportunity for personal development of self and teammates can be a very satisfying and rewarding experience. And then we move on as how we have to be aware that teams aren't always the answer. Teamwork takes more time and often more resources than individual work. Teams have increased communication demands, conflicts to manage, and meetings to run. So the benefits of using teams have to exceed the cost, and that's not always the case. How do you know whether the work of your group would be better done in teams? Managers can apply the 3 tests. First is, can the work be done better by more than one person? A good indicator is the complexity of the work and the need for different perspectives. Simple tasks that don't require diverse input are probably better left to individuals. Secondly, does the work create a common purpose or set of goals for the people in the group that is more than the aggregate of individual goals? Many service departments of new vehicle dealers have introduced teams that link customer service people, mechanics, parts specialists, and sales representatives. Such teams can better manage collective responsibility for ensuring customer needs are properly met. The final test is to determine whether the members of the group are interdependent. Using teams makes sense when there is interdependence among tasks, and the success of the whole depends on the success of each one, and the success of each one depends on the success of the others. For instance, soccer is an obvious team sport. Success requires a great deal of coordination between interdependent players. Conversely, except possibly for relays, swim teams are not really teams. They are a group of individuals performing individually, whose total performance is merely the aggregate summation of their individual performances. That's all from our group. Thank you everyone for listening to our group presentation.